Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining this session of Bite Size Business. We're all super excited to be back here sharing some more insightful information as far as early talent recruitment goes. Today, we're going to be focusing on the importance of perception of your company and your industry when it comes to speaking and engaging with this next generation of talent. Employer brand is so incredibly important, and we see it time in and time again. That when you're talking about getting early talent excited to work for your company, to be loyal to your company, but it's so important to take that step back and start what we say is square one. Well, what do they even really think about your company? So I'm Hannah. I'm on our partnerships team here at Tallo. I will be joined by some of my favorite colleagues. We've got our data scientist analyst, Greg, and our director of customer experience, Colin, who should be both hopping on here shortly. Hey, Greg. Hey, Colin. How are you guys? Happy Friday.
Hey, happy Friday.
Good morning. Doing good. How are you?
Awesome. I'm really excited to be joined by both of you today. I think you both have incredible insight into the service that we offer, but just really the importance and lessons learned as we continuously support our partners as they're formulating their early talent pipeline and just their strategy behind it all. So I think just to get started, a little bit of a level set without sharing the secret sauce, but understanding being on separate teams, Colin and Greg, what is your parts of this process of perception?
Well, I guess we'll start with what I do. I begin the process by, for one, looking at the requirements, like what are we trying to find out, and using that to determine who are we going to reach out to, what does our audience look like, and then with that, how are we going to approach them? What kind of what is the format of our questions, and how are we going to reach them? So I come up with those things, meet with a group of people, whether it's a survey, if it's questions that we need to develop, I'll start that process. And then Greg will do his part to actually go out and analyze the data that we've gathered. And at the end, I summarize it into a nice format so that we can see what the results are. If we are doing this with a client, they can see exactly what we've learned from that analysis. So I put that final presentation together.
Awesome. And before we move on to Greg's portion, Colin, if you could elaborate a little bit on the talent that we go after, depending on who we're doing this type of perception analysis for. Are we doing it very targeted? Do we go off of what the client is asking for? What does that kind of look like?
It really depends. It depends on what it is we're looking for. For example, you might have a client, or we might just be looking to gather information about what a particular group thinks about a certain career field or industry. And if we really truly want to know, for example, let's look at all of our talent that we know are interested in healthcare, and let's find out why they're interested in healthcare. What is it about healthcare that interests them? So in that particular case, we would want to talk to the people who have expressed interest in healthcare. If we want to learn generally about talent that's out there, whether it's high school age, college age, all of the above, what do all of them think about healthcare, then we don't target it very much. And a lot of times we learn quite a bit from people that we never would have thought were interested in healthcare. Like now we know why they're not interested in healthcare. This might be valuable information for our healthcare partners so that they can start to reach those audiences. So it really depends on the situation.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important lesson. I think a lot of times when we first start speaking to partners or those interested in perception of early talent, they're very much wanting to be able to outreach to the talent that they think will be interested in their opportunities. And I think something that is, no matter across the board, industry, company, whoever we're doing this type of service for, what we always find is there is a lot of interest outside of who you typically think you'd be going after. And I think that supports the importance of getting in front of the talent early and often, because you really have that opportunity to change or even just bring new awareness to different opportunities or industries in general. Colin, when we do outreach to the talent, is there a way that we help support the engagement? Because I know when we move on to Greg, an important part of his responsibility is he's going to need a pretty big pool of responses. And so how do we cultivate that and make sure that we're successful, and the importance of that in general?
Well, as everybody knows, everybody's getting surveys, everybody's getting requests for information, interest forms, please apply for this. Everybody's kind of over it. They're tired of it. That's what we get all the time. So yeah, we do have to offer different types of incentives. Sometimes it's an incentive to be an exclusive participant in an event. But we also, one of Tallo's strengths is that we offer scholarships. So many times when we are, approaching student audience, whether it's high school, college, or otherwise, we can offer the opportunity to earn an incentive by participating in this perception survey. Of course, we emphasize that the answers they give, the feedback they give, has nothing to do with whether or not they get the incentive, the scholarship. Just their participation puts them in an even playing field with everybody else who participated, and they may be chosen for a scholarship. So that tends to be very successful because, yeah, we do have to have a decent sized pool of data. Otherwise, it's not as relevant.
Yeah. And one last question, and then we can move on to Greg, but I want to come back to some of those findings on the executive summary. But how often, when we're doing these campaign messages out to collect this information, do we send it multiple times, or are we just sending it once? And how many questions are we typically asking when we need to collect the data for perception?
How often we send it it really does depend on how it does. If we send it out one time and we get a huge response, then we may not need to send it, maybe one more time. Just more numbers is always better, more accurate. But typically we would probably send it 3 to 4 times out to the same audience, of course, not touching the same people who have already responded. But we'll kind of go through that same audience a few times because we want those numbers, and that tends to be very successful. So yeah, I don't know that we've ever had to approach an audience more than 3 or 4 times because they like that incentive. They know that I only have to answer a few questions and I have a chance at a scholarship or something like that. We have done these surveys up to 10 to 12 questions, but we try to stay a little lower than that. We try to stay closer to somewhere between 6 to 8 questions because we do like to get text-based questions rather than multiple choice because it gives us more information, but that also means we're asking more of the respondent. So we don't want to put too much of a burden on them, because that's going to lower how many responses we get.
Right. That makes total sense. Well, okay. So Colin's team is starting out our perception, right? Like, something very unique to Tallo is that we've got that early talent. We can outreach, we can get that survey, that data, and then we get it over to Greg's team. Greg, if you don't mind jumping in now and sharing a little bit about how you and your team support perception.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So after, we have a discussion with Colin and his team to understand the questions that are getting asked, kind of find that happy medium between multiple choice and open text. Like Colin stated, we prefer the open text, but obviously we can't do them all that way. Multiple choice has its place too, obviously, to kind of provide a better understanding of the user and kind of quantify some qualitative things. But after we have that discussion, we send out the survey, we get our responses, we ingest all that data into our data lake. We then clean it, model it, get the responses ready to be analyzed. We put them through a program that was built by our team in-house to get both a subjectivity and a polarity score for every single open text comment and response. We'll get into kind of what the difference between subjectivity and polarity is. And with that, we kind of get a really good picture on not only what the words are saying, but how they're being said. Are they opinionated? Are they subjective? Are they positive? Are they negative? Once we get that, we kind of we then move that data into a dashboard that is available for clients, as well as Colin and his team use it to understand the users who responded, their demographic information, where they're located, their interests for college and career, and then as well as breaking down, their responses and the scores that go along with them. And once we get that ready, we help Colin and his team kind of solidify that executive summary report, make sure that his team is aligned with our team and understanding, what the data is saying more than just how it's being said.
Awesome. And then I think one of my first questions always, and something I find so interesting, is, Greg, can you share a little bit more about like the importance of open-ended questions and why that helps provide more insight for partners who are looking at perception?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I mentioned, we get these two scores. We get these subjectivity scores and we get these polarity scores. And kind of what their definitions are is subjectivity, similar to how the word subjective and objective is, how opinionated a comment is versus how, hard factual it is. And, there's a distinct difference, because if somebody's talking on only opinions, the positivity and negativity don't necessarily matter. Now we get into polarity, which is the positivity and negativity of a comment. So these numbers have different ranges, 0 to 1 or -1 to +1. But we kind of do some math to get a score based off of, how they're saying these words. So what an open text response gives us is, it gives us that ability to interpret further than just clicking on multiple choice and just getting, the same answer from 25% of the population, because everybody's going to comment differently, whether they're saying the same things or not. How they're saying it is always going to be different.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that allows for our partners to get more in-depth information versus if we were just doing multiple choice. And just like you're saying, 25% of our population that we're outreaching to could just put the same answer. And that's really, really simple to do. So in addition to both of those, is there anything else that we provide through the data as more metrics for the perception?
Yeah, so I mean, who the people are is just as important as what they're saying. So
Yep.
Tallo has this fantastic population of early talent where we have all of their demographic information. We know where they're located. Obviously, we don't provide anything specific, but we can provide general numbers on their gender, their ethnicity, whether they're a first generation American or not. And then we also have the next step, which is, what are they interested in, right? Where do they want to work? What states do they want to work in, their geographic preference? What careers do they want to get into? They're in high school. What college majors are they interested in? What colleges are they in? So we're able to not only understand what they're saying, how they're saying it, but we're also starting to really understand who they are. And we can, match up that, a majority of positive have this sort of demographic information, a majority of negative have this sort of demographic information. So we can help our partners kind of understand, who they really need to be targeting when it comes to this sort of perception.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And really with Tallo's profile, so we are all about self-reported data here as far as our users go. And I think that makes these perception analysis really strong, because we're not doing that auto batch uploading for our users, but they're really sharing that information. And that just gives a ton of insight when filling out this survey. And, we have partners all the time come to us that are working on diversity and inclusion efforts, or they're wondering in the United States, which regions are they pulling in more interest naturally, and where do they need to, see some more improvement. And by doing this survey, they're able to see all of those insights. And I think those insights even lead to a powerful pipeline of early talent as well. Colin, back to you. After Greg does all his amazing work as far as data goes, we then put together typically for our partners, not only that dashboard that we hit on, but also an executive summary, because that's really easy for them to share out with their colleagues and for them to be able just to see overall some of those really big takeaways. And from there, it's really where Tallo comes in and we build a process. But you've put together a lot of these. We've done these for all different types of industries, like the crane industry. We've done them for all different types of companies, such as aerospace, finance, IT, business, healthcare. We've seen really, really just insightful, I think, feedback, and I always love sharing them afterwards. But Colin, what would you say is some of your really, really big takeaways when you put these together, things where you say, whoa, wasn't expecting that?
Well, the big one goes back to those subjectivity and polarity scores. Something that before I got into this really wouldn't have occurred to me, that you can measure this kind of thing. But, perfect example would be in a recent analysis that we did, we looked at subjectivity, polarity, and like Greg said, we also looked at a picture of the actual demographics of who these respondents were, how they reported. And in this particular example, it was how they reported their gender and comparing that to the polarity of their responses. And, in this particular case, we found that the respondents who identified as other instead of male or female when it came to gender, they had an average polarity or, positive feeling was 32% lower than the respondents who identified as male or female. So what does that mean? I mean, it is, it could be open to interpretation, but to me, that says that this client or this industry might not have a perception publicly that feels welcoming to people who identify as anything other than male and female. So that's some information that I think is important for them to take back. And, you just mentioned DEI initiatives. This is a perfect example of that. So you're not going to get that from a multiple choice question. That's something that really comes from how they feel, the tone of their responses.
And just really quickly, without knowing this information, you can never build a plan. So if you don't understand the foundation of where you're starting, how do you even know how to improve or just change your trajectory or direction when you're reaching out to this talent?
Exactly. And, another one that's a good example of that was we did one military related and found that some of the highest polarity scores came from those who were more subjective. But it was because what they identified as this is why I'd want to work in this field in the military or in defense was because it was so important to them that they be patriotic, that they protect their country. And so all that's subjective. That's not about, the number of jobs or the high salaries or anything like that. But, if the military, if the Department of Defense is really pushing hard that, the sense of duty that people should have if they want to consider working in that area, then it's working. The people who feel the most positive about it, that's why they feel like it's their patriotic duty. So it's very interesting looking at how the polarity and subjectivity impact, these results. If we took that out, I don't think it would be, I don't think it would be worth it, honestly, to do these. The subjectivity and polarity is really the meat of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think I remember you sharing you were surprised by some of the talent's answer as far as their knowledge on, I think, soft and hard skills. Was there some comments you had on that too?
Yeah, we can also look at that. We'll ask questions, or not necessarily ask questions, but we can look at what they've identified as these are my top strengths. And we're not talking about coding or working machinery. We're talking about the soft skills, whether that's leadership or public speaking, things like that. And that's where they tend to self-report, is that their strongest skills are the soft skills. And so that's important to an employer or to, a labor department or anything, for them to understand that the soft skills, if that's what the talent feels are their strengths, that's a good thing, because soft skills are a lot harder to teach. They take a lot longer to teach. They're bad habits to break. Whereas, finding someone who already feels very strong in their soft skills, their leadership, their public speaking, their project management, you can teach them to code. The personality stuff is harder. So it is interesting to see that when the talent pool puts more emphasis on their own soft skill strength, that's a great sign. That's a sign of, someone with strong soft skills can be taught, this is a very broad statement, but can be taught anything.
Mm-hmm.
So those hard technical skills.
Really insightful. I think one that always stands out to me is one we did for an industry within the skilled trades. And like one of their top things that they said is that they just do not know what they don't know. And like they would be interested in learning about job opportunities, but they've just never seen where the job opportunities are or even how to connect with them. And I think, that was very eye-opening for them to be able to see. And just that goes back to the power of Tallo's user pool and being able to have that information readily available. Greg, I know you're not really on that side of it, but have you done any where you're like, oh, that was interesting, or that really stood out to me, as far as some of the data we were able to collect?
Yeah. For example, last year we did one with somebody in the aerospace industry, and it was really, and that one was one of my favorite ones that we did because we had done one for them a couple of years prior. So we were able to really see kind of how Tallo and their own work in terms of educating the younger talent pool really changed their perception of that company. And we were able to really see like an extremely positive increase in how people perceived that company. Not even just the industry, that company specifically, over that 2-year period, that growth was absolutely incredible to take a look at, really important to analyze. Obviously, not all the same people, but when we start to get, larger groups of people together and understand their answers, we can start to get a general understanding of, the feelings that these people have. So we're able to see a growth in positivity on subjective statements for that company over a 2-year period.
That's a really good point. I always forget that we can do this as far as how you stack up to your competitors too. And I think what's cool is over time, we can see that when you do get in front of talent early and you do get them in front of them often, you can change where you stack up to your competitors in a positive way. And we've seen that with some of our enterprise or more so industry partners. And that is a really neat opportunity to be able to see. Well, guys, I think we went through everything. Is there anything else you wanted to bring to the table as far as perception goes?
Well, I'll just add just one little thing to what you just said, where you're talking about competitors. Doing this kind of analysis is how you beat your competitor, knowing those inside secrets that they haven't bothered to look for, or they don't know to look for. The one that you mentioned earlier, the skilled trades perception that we did, one of the things we learned there was that the people who responded with a lower polarity, the lower positive responses, when we asked them what they think the careers are like, all it was about was dangerous, dirty, outdoors, a whole group of people who, if they knew that there's a lot more to skilled trades than putting on a hard hat, there's project management, there's contracting that isn't necessarily doing those manual labor skills all the time, that would change their perception of the industry. And if one company in the industry did that analysis and the rest didn't, now they've got an upper hand in hiring and how they promote their opportunities. So anyway, all very interesting stuff.
Yeah, which is really powerful. So if there's anyone listening today, part of we've done this, across industries at a workforce initiative level, at a company level, or even a college and university level. It really does span across all of our different types of partnerships. We're happy to start the conversation and see what is of interest and if we can provide those deliverables based off of perception and the user base that we have. But we appreciate everyone joining us. It's always a pleasure to spend some time with you, Greg and Colin. Really insightful information you shared. And if any questions do come up, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you for joining this session of Bite Size Business.
Thank you.